In the truly vast ocean of space-time, nestled between the glittering islands we call galaxies, there lies an emptiness so profound it borders on the absolute. This is the great interstellar void, a realm of unending cold, of a darkness untouched by any dawn, where the very pulse of time itself seems to slow to a near-perfect stillness. It is a silence that stretches for light years, a cosmic gulf that separates suns from suns and worlds from worlds. Here, the laws of physics operate in their purest, most undisturbed state, far from the chaotic warmth of stars and the gravitational churn of planets, a silent, sprawling canvas upon which the rare, bright strokes of matter are painted. It is a place where a single atom might drift for 1,000,000 years before encountering another, a kingdom of patience and profound solitude. And it is from this deep, patient darkness that our story begins. But even in that perfect stillness, there are travelers, lonely pilgrims, cast out from their native star systems by gravitational upheavals billions of years ago, wandering the great dark on trajectories written by chaos. They are silent messengers, carrying the chemical fingerprints of their lost homes. And on July 1st, 2025, as our planet wheeled through its familiar path, one of these ancient wanderers, a dark, elongated shadow, finally drifted from that infinite night into the fragile light of our awareness. Science gave it a name, 3I divided by Atlas, the third interstellar object ever confirmed. And in that name, comet, there is a profound promise, an ancient covenant between ice and fire. For a comet, by its very definition, is not just a rock, it is a time capsule, a dirty snowball carrying the frozen breath of a stellar dawn. Its life is a grand drama, a long, frozen slumber, followed by a spectacular awakening. The covenant dictates that when this wanderer feels the first, faint warmth of a star, as it crosses the frost line into the inner solar system, it must awaken. The ancient ices, preserved for eons in the absolute zero of the void, begin to stir. They do not merely melt, they sublimate, transforming directly from solid ice into gas, bursting forth from the surface in brilliant jets. This release of vapor and trapped dust creates a magnificent, glowing shroud, a temporary atmosphere called the coma. And as the comet plunges deeper toward the sun, that glowing head is swept back by the solar wind, unfurling the glorious, million-mile banner that is its tail. This is not just a display. It is the comet's voice, its signature, an unmistakable testament to its icy nature, a brilliant greeting from the deep past. But 3I divided by Atlas. It broke the covenant. As it plunges toward its closest approach to our sun, due on October 30th of this very year, 2025, as it crosses the very threshold where a comet should shout its presence to the heavens, it remains utterly silent. The greatest telescopes on Earth, optical and radio, have strained to listen, to catch the faintest whisper of sublimating gas, the slightest hint of a dusty shroud. But there is nothing, just the cold, inert reflection of sunlight from a dark, solid object. It is a fire dragon flying past the sun without breathing a single wisp of smoke. It is a profound, unsettling silence, a celestial contradiction that challenges the very definition we have created for these icy visitors. It does not behave as a comet. It does not move with the simple, predictable trajectory of a passive, icy wanderer. Its very form, hinted at by the strange, rhythmic pulse of its reflected light, seems impossibly alien, a shape that nature itself would struggle to sculpt. We are left staring into a void of understanding, a profound cognitive dissonance. When an object arrives that violates every criterion we have established for a category, does our definition simply need to expand? Is this merely a new, bizarre class of natural phenomenon? A cosmic eccentricity that the universe has finally chosen to reveal to us? Or are we looking at something else? Something that does not fit into our neat boxes of rock or ice at all? The question, therefore, that we are forced to confront, a question that hangs, heavy and persistent, in the quiet spaces of our curiosity is this. If 3I divided by Atlas is not behaving like a comet, is it, in fact, a comet at all? Or is it something else entirely? To truly comprehend the anomaly, we must first establish the baseline. To feel the sheer strangeness of 3I divided by Atlas, we must journey back to the very definition of the object it pretends to be. So, what truly is a comet? We often hear the simple moniker, dirty snowballs, but this phrase, while functional, strips them of their profound majesty. A comet is not merely a chunk of ice. You must conceptualize it as a time capsule. Picture it as a perfect fossil, preserved not in amber, but in the crystalline stillness of absolute zero. Comets are the leftover whispers, the untouched, unprocessed material from the very dawn of our solar system 4.5 billion years in the past. They are fragments of that initial swirling nebula of gas and dust from which our sun, our Earth, and indeed our very bodies were forged. While the planets were born in the violent, molten crucible of accretion and gravitational churning, melting and reforming, the comets were violently ejected into the great, frozen, dark, exiled to the far-flung realm we call the Oort cloud. There, in that near-perfect vacuum, their ancient, volatile chemistry was locked in a state of suspended animation, a perfect snapshot of our solar system's infancy. Therefore, a comet is not a thing so much as it is a message. It is a letter from our own most distant past, a celestial artifact that allows us to read the story of our own origins, a story written in molecules of ice and dust before the Earth itself had even cooled. Their dance is choreographed entirely by the Sunday. For eons, they drift in the dark, silent and inert. But as gravity inevitably pulls one from its distant orbit, it begins the long fall inward toward the fire. As it crosses the threshold of warmth, a line in space we call the frost line, the ancient ices on its surface begin to feel a new energy. They do not melt in the vacuum of space. Liquid water is an impossibility. Instead, they sublimate. They erupt, transforming in an instant from a 4 billion-year-old solid into a fresh gas, bursting forth from the nucleus in powerful, invisible jets. This outgassing, this sudden, violent exhalation, carries with it the primordial dust that was trapped within the ice. Together, this gas and dust form a vast, glowing shroud around the comet's core, an ethereal atmosphere known as the coma, which can swell to be larger than a planet. And then, the sun exerts its full power. The relentless stream of particles and radiation, the solar wind, acts as a cosmic sculptor. It seizes this fleeting atmosphere and pushes it away, stretching it out across millions of kilometers of empty space. This is the comet's grand reveal. It unfurls not one, but two glorious tails. A bright, gently curved tail of dust, shining like spilled milk across the stars as it follows the comet's orbital path, and a fainter, straighter tail of ionized gas, a ghostly blue streamer that points directly away from the sun, like a windsock in a gale. This entire spectacle, this outgassing, this coma, these twin tails, this is not just something a comet does. It is, fundamentally, what a comet is. It is its soul, its voice, its entire purpose made visible against the night. And then 3I divided by Atlas appeared, and it arrived bearing an unmistakable mathematical fingerprint, its trajectory. It was not the gentle, looping, closed ellipse of our native comets, those familiar wanderers like Halley's, which are bound by the sun's gravity and fated to return, again and again, in predictable cycles. No, the path of 3I divided by Atlas was a stark, wide-open, unbound hyperbola. This is not a subtle geometric distinction. It is the fundamental difference between a member of the family and a stranger passing on the street. It is the difference between a stone you toss into the air, which gravity inevitably, gently, returns to your hand, and a bullet fired from a rifle with such an astonishing velocity that it overcomes the pull of the Earth entirely, coasting on its own momentum into the infinite. This single elegant curve, etched across the fabric of our solar system, told us one thing with absolute, chilling certainty. 3I divided by Atlas does not belong to us. It was not born of our Sunday. It is a one-time visitor, a fleeting encounter. It is just passing through, and it will never, ever return. It is therefore a messenger, an ambassador from a place we have never seen, carrying in its cold, dark heart the primordial chemical recipe of an alien star system. Every molecule locked in its surface, every grain of exotic dust, is a letter in a language we are just learning to read, a chapter from a story that began light years away and eons ago. And so, as it approached, as this rare emissary from the interstellar dark finally entered the warm laboratory of our inner solar system, we prepared to read that story. We aimed our most powerful eyes, our digital scribes, our spectroscopic tools, expecting to witness the familiar, glorious unfolding. We expected to see the awakening we know so well, the ice turning to gas, the shroud of the coma, the magnificent tail, the fundamental, universal signature of a comet. But when we strained to translate this greeting from another world, we were met only with silence. A profound, baffling, and almost challenging silence. The messenger had arrived, but its pages, it seemed, were blank. And this very blankness, this cold, quiet refusal to speak the language of comets, is where our investigation truly begins. The first anomaly is the most profound, a mystery defined not by a presence, but by an astonishing absence. It is the silence where a symphony was expected. As 3I divided by Atlas began its inbound journey, crossing the line where sunlight holds enough warmth to stir the ancient ices, our greatest observatories turned to listen. The James Webb Space Telescope, with its unparalleled sensitivity to the infrared universe, stared intently, searching for the telltale characteristic glow of water molecules, the warm breath of H2O being liberated from its frozen prison. Simultaneously, the planet's most powerful radio telescope arrays, vast networks of dishes like ALMA in Chile, pointed their collective ears toward it. They were straining to catch a very specific, faint radio frequency, the cold, rotational hum of carbon monoxide, or CO. Carbon monoxide is the vanguard of cometary activity. It is so volatile, it's the first gas to sing as a comet awakens, long before the water ice even begins to stir. These two signatures, water and CO, are the fundamental expected size of a thawing celestial iceberg, and yet there was nothing. Where the resulting graphs, the spectra, should have shown sharp, definitive peaks rising above the noise. The unmistakable chemical fingerprints proving the existence of these gases, they showed only a flat, sterile, featureless line. It was the spectroscopic equivalent of a deafening silence. An object of this immense size, passing this close to our star, should be shedding tons of material per second in a brilliant, chaotic display. But this object was, and remains, utterly, impossibly inert. Imagine a grand, ancient cathedral built to resonate with a specific, glorious chord, and imagine the sun as a vast, divine organ, beginning to play that very chord, its light and warmth flooding the sanctuary. Any other structure, any normal comet, would immediately begin to sing in harmony, its icy buttresses and frozen windows vibrating, filling the space with the sound of its own substance. But 3I divided by Atlas, built of the same materials, in the same sacred space, remains mute. The organ is playing, the light is flooding in, but the cathedral itself absorbs the sound, refuses to resonate, refuses to participate in the celestial choir. It is a profound architectural defiance. It is an instrument that refuses to make music. This is the nature of the first anomaly. A silence so deep, it is not merely an absence of sound, but an active, physical refusal to sing. But this is where the mystery deepens, where the silence ceases to be a simple absence and becomes an active, aggressive contradiction. Because while 3I divided by Atlas remained perfectly silent, it did not follow the precise, elegant path that gravity alone had decreed for it. Astronomers, tracking its journey with millimeter-wave precision, began to detect a discrepancy. A tiny, almost imperceptible drift, a minute deviation from the sacred Newtonian curve it was supposed to be following. It was impossibly accelerating. This is what orbital mechanics calls non-gravitational acceleration. To put it in simpler terms, something other than the immense, predictable pull of the sun and the planets was giving it a gentle, persistent push. In any other comet, this phenomenon is perfectly understood. It is the most famous part of their behavior. It is the rocket effect. As those jets of gas and dust erupt violently from the sun-warmed side of the nucleus, they act just like tiny, continuous thrusters, pushing the comet's core in the opposite direction. This is the mechanical, causal force that makes a comet drift from its purely gravitational path. This push is the direct physical consequence of the very outgassing, the very symphony of sublimation that we have just established, with absolute certainty, is not happening. 3. I divided by Atlas, therefore confronts us with a maddening, impossible scenario. We are clearly observing the physical effect of a powerful engine, while simultaneously observing that the engine itself is cold, dark, and completely switched off. Imagine, for a moment, that you are standing at the edge of a vast, perfectly still mountain lake just before dawn. The air is so cold and heavy that it has become a solid presence, a crystalline weight. There is no wind. Not a single leaf on the ancient pines surrounding the shore trembles. The surface of the lake itself is not merely calm, it is a flawless silvered mirror, a sheet of polished obsidian that perfectly reflects the pinprick stillness of the stars above. This lake represents the pure, undisturbed, predictable fabric of space-time, governed by the elegant, ironclad laws of gravity. In this perfect, windless world, the only way an object should move is if it is pulled by the gentle, sloping gravity of the lake bed, a predictable drift. Now, out in the middle of this lake, you see a sailboat. Its mast is bare. Its great white sails are not just furled, they are gone, stripped from the rigging. The first anomaly is the most profound, a mystery defined not by a presence, but by an astonishing absence. It is the silence where a symphony was expected. As 3I divided by Atlas began its inbound journey, crossing the line where sunlight holds enough warmth to stir the ancient ices, our greatest observatories turned to listen. The James Webb Space Telescope, with its unparalleled sensitivity to the infrared universe, stared intently, searching for the telltale characteristic glow of water molecules, the warm breath of H2O being liberated from its frozen prison. Simultaneously, the planet's most powerful radio telescope arrays, vast networks of dishes like ALMA in Chile, pointed their collective ears toward it. They were straining to catch a very specific, faint radio frequency, the cold, rotational hum of carbon monoxide, or CO. Carbon monoxide is the vanguard of cometary activity. It is so volatile, it's the first gas to sing as a comet awakens, long before the water ice even begins to stir. These two signatures, water and CO, are the fundamental expected size of a thawing celestial iceberg, and yet there was nothing. Where the resulting graphs, the spectra, should have shown sharp, definitive peaks rising above the noise. The unmistakable chemical fingerprints proving the existence of these gases, they showed only a flat, sterile, featureless line. It was the spectroscopic equivalent of a deafening silence. An object of this immense size, passing this close to our star, should be shedding tons of material per second in a brilliant, chaotic display. But this object was, and remains, utterly, impossibly inert. Imagine a grand, ancient cathedral built to resonate with a specific, glorious chord, and imagine the sun as a vast, divine organ, beginning to play that very chord, its light and warmth flooding the sanctuary. Any other structure, any normal comet, would immediately begin to sing in harmony, its icy buttresses and frozen windows vibrating, filling the space with the sound of its own substance. But 3I divided by Atlas, built of the same materials, in the same sacred space, remains mute. The organ is playing, the light is flooding in, but the cathedral itself absorbs the sound, refuses to resonate, refuses to participate in the celestial choir. It is a profound architectural defiance. It is an instrument that refuses to make music. This is the nature of the first anomaly, a silence so deep it is not merely an absence of sound, but an active, physical refusal to sing. But this is where the mystery deepens, where the silence ceases to be a simple absence and becomes an active, aggressive contradiction. Because while 3I divided by Atlas remained perfectly silent, it did not follow the precise, elegant path that gravity alone had decreed for it. Astronomers, tracking its journey with millimeter-wave precision, began to detect a discrepancy. A tiny, almost imperceptible drift, a minute deviation from the sacred Newtonian curve it was supposed to be following. It was impossibly accelerating. This is what orbital mechanics calls non-gravitational acceleration. To put it in simpler terms, Something other than the immense, predictable pull of the sun and the planets was giving it a gentle, persistent push. In any other comet, this phenomenon is perfectly understood. It is the most famous part of their behavior. It is the rocket effect. As those jets of gas and dust erupt violently from the sun-warmed side of the nucleus, they act just like tiny, continuous thrusters, pushing the comet's core in the opposite direction. This is the mechanical, causal force that makes a comet drift from its purely gravitational path. This push is the direct physical consequence of the very outgassing, the very symphony of sublimation that we have just established, with absolute certainty, is not happening. 3. I divided by Atlas therefore confronts us with a maddening, impossible scenario. We are clearly observing the physical effect of a powerful engine, while simultaneously observing that the engine itself is cold, dark, and completely switched off. Imagine, for a moment, that you are standing at the edge of a vast, perfectly still mountain lake just before dawn. The air is so cold and heavy that it has become a solid presence, a crystalline weight. There is no wind. Not a single leaf on the ancient pines surrounding the shore trembles. The surface of the lake itself is not merely calm. It is a flawless, silvered mirror, a sheet of polished obsidian that perfectly reflects the pinprick stillness of the stars above. This lake represents the pure, undisturbed, predictable fabric of space-time, governed by the elegant, ironclad laws of gravity. In this perfect, windless world, the only way an object should move is if it is pulled by the gentle, sloping gravity of the lake bed, a predictable drift. Now, out in the middle of this lake, you see a sailboat. Its mast is bare. Its great white sails are not just furled, they are gone, stripped from the rigging. The light that 3 I divided by Atlas cast back at us, the simple, passive reflection of our own sun's glow, began to tell its own bizarre story. As astronomers watched it over hours and days, they observed it blinking. But this was not the gentle, rolling, rhythmic wave of light one would expect from a tumbling, potato-shaped asteroid, which would present a slightly different, but roughly similar, surface area as it turns. No, the pulse of 3 I divided by Atlas was sharp, dramatic, and extreme. The resulting data, the graph of its varying brightness that we call a light curve, was unlike any natural object we had ever charted. The object's brightness would flare, becoming intensely bright, and then, just as rapidly, it would plummet, fading to a dim, barely perceptible point of light, a variation of more than 10 to 1 again and again with every rotation. This radical oscillation is not just a curious detail, it is a mathematical fingerprint, a geometric shadow that reveals a profound and unavoidable truth about its physical form. For an object to change its brightness so drastically, it must possess an extreme, radical geometry. It cannot be a sphere or a rough, lumpy rock. It must be incredibly elongated, perhaps 10 times as long as it is wide, a perfect, needle-like cigar shape, tumbling end over end through space. Or, perhaps even more strangely, it must be astonishingly flat, a planar object, a disc or a pancake shape, presenting a huge reflective face at one moment, and then a razor-thin, nearly invisible edge just a few hours later. Imagine you are walking along an ancient cosmic shoreline, a beach not of sand but of the collected debris of billions of years of solar system formation. You are looking at the pebbles. For eons, the great, churning ocean of space, the relentless, chaotic tide of micrometeorite impacts, of gravitational stresses from passing planets, of the subtle yet persistent pressure of stellar winds, acts as a universal rock tumbler. It takes the sharp, fractured, primordial debris of planetary birth and it grinds them down. It smooths their edges, it blunts their points, it favors the statistically stable, it produces pebbles, lumpy, oblong, potato-like shapes. The familiar, beautifully imperfect forms of the asteroids and comets we have always known. This is the expected, comforting signature of chaos, time, and physics. But then, as you scan this beach of countless rounded stones, your eye catches an impossible glint of light. You reach down, and you pull from the cosmic surf not a pebble, but something else. It is a perfect, impossibly thin needle of polished obsidian, 100 times longer than it is wide. Or perhaps it is a flawless, razor-thin disc of glass, as flat and round as a coin, polished to a perfect mirror finish. Such a shape is a profound, screaming statistical anomaly. The very same chaotic ocean that rounds the billions of stones should have, by all rights, shattered such a fragile, delicate, and extreme form eons ago. Its very existence is a paradox. It is a shape that seems to defy the very natural processes of the environment it was found in. It is a form that does not whisper of random, chaotic tumbling. It is a form that seems to speak instead of structure, of purpose, or of a physics so alien it has no business existing in our quiet cosmic neighborhood. Finding such an object on this beach is not merely a scientific curiosity, it is a profound intellectual challenge. It suggests that a different kind of craftsman or a different and far stranger set of rules was responsible for its creation. And then the fourth anomaly. This one is not about its substance or its path, but about its very composure, its rotational state. An object in space, left to its own devices for eons, will find its most stable, lowest energy state of rotation. It will settle into a clean, predictable spin around one of its principal axes, its center of mass. Think of a perfectly thrown football, spinning in a tight, stable spiral, or the Earth, turning with majestic stability on its axis for 4 billion years. This is physics finding its equilibrium, its most peaceful state. But 3I divided by Atlas was not in a state of peace. It was not in a simple, stable spin. It was instead in what we call a complex rotational state. It was tumbling chaotically. It was lurching and wobbling simultaneously, its axis of rotation constantly shifting, like a badly thrown book, flipping end over end and side to side all at once. This kind of chaotic tumble is not a stable long-term state. It is the signature of a recent event. It is the physical evidence of a violent collision, an impact or a gravitational torque that has just, in cosmic terms, bumped it, knocking it off kilter. But here is the profound contradiction. This object is ancient. It has been traveling in the void for millions, perhaps billions of years. Over that immense journey, any such wobble, any such chaotic energy should have been dissipated. The object's own internal friction, the subtle flexing of its structure, would have acted as a damper, gradually, inevitably, bleeding away that chaotic energy until the object settled into the simplest, most stable spin possible. To find an object this old, still tumbling this violently, is like walking into an ancient sealed tomb that has been undisturbed for 1,000 years, and finding a spinning top on the floor, wobbling and clattering as if it had been set in motion, just 1 second before you opened the door. It implies a force, an event, or a property of physics that we simply cannot account for. Fifth, we must consider the path itself. We have spoken of the object's internal state, its chaotic, violent tumble, the sign of a recent trauma. Now we must look to its external journey, its grand trajectory through our solar system, which, in stark contrast, suggests not chaos but a sense of profound, unsettling order. You must first visualize the sheer, three-dimensional emptiness of space. The galaxy is a sphere of infinite possibilities. An object flung from a random star by a random gravitational event should arrive from a random direction. Think of our solar system as a single thin sheet of paper floating perfectly flat inside a colossal dark cathedral. Any pebble dropped from the vast high ceiling, the dome of the heavens, should, by all laws of chance, pierce that paper from above or fly up from the floor and pierce it from below. The number of angles from which it can strike is nearly infinite. The chances of that pebble happening to fly in perfectly horizontally, gliding within the paper-thin dimension of the sheet itself, is so statistically microscopic as to be functionally zero. That thin sheet, that single plane, is the ecliptic. It is the impossibly flat disk, like a vast spinning vinyl record, upon which all of our planets orbit the Sunday. It is the ground floor of our solar system. And yet, 3I divided by Atlas did not plunge through our home from above or below at a steep, chaotic angle, as all statistical models would predict. It arrived instead almost perfectly on that plane. It coasted in flat, sliding horizontally into the system, nearly parallel with the very grooves that hold Earth, Mars, and Jupiter. This is an alignment so precise, so convenient, it borders on the statistically absurd. It is the cosmic equivalent of a single grain of sand thrown from a mile away, not only landing on one specific dinner plate in an entire city, but landing perfectly on its rim and rolling around the edge. This orbit, this Lau inclination, is a profound anomaly. It defies the random, chaotic nature its interstellar origin implies. It is a path that seems almost efficient, an orbit that is pre-aligned with our world, a trajectory that minimizes the energy required to travel from planet to planet. This convenience is deeply unsettling. It suggests a path that is not random. It feels less like a chaotic, tumbling rock falling from the heavens, and more like a ship, deliberately, carefully, and with profound knowledge, navigating the one, true, shallow channel that leads into our quiet harbor. And sixth, if its arrival path was unnervingly convenient, its departure point, its origin story, is a profound chronological paradox. When our astronomers, armed with the object's precise velocity and vector, traced its hyperbolic trajectory backward in time, they were attempting to answer the most human of all questions: where did you come from? Our models, our understanding of galactic dynamics, provided a clear prediction. These interstellar exiles should be born in violence. They are the shrapnel from chaotic, young, star-forming regions, the stellar nurseries, the great, fiery forges like the Orion Nebula, where gravitational tug-of-wars between newborn stars are constantly flinging planets and comets out into the deep void. We expected its path to point back to one of these nearby, messy, energetic cradles. But it did not. The velocity of 3I divided by Atlas, its motion relative to our Sun, was not chaotic or fast. It was strangely calm. Its vector aligns it almost perfectly with the local standard of rest, the gentle, average river-like flow of the oldest, most stable stars in our part of the galaxy. This was not a projectile recently fired from a cannon. This was a piece of driftwood, something that had been floating in the ancient, quiet currents of the galaxy for perhaps billions of years. And here, the entire edifice of our understanding begins to crack. We are now faced with an object that, according to its motion, is ancient, perhaps billions of years old. Yet, as we just established, it is tumbling, anomaly #4, as if it were violently struck just yesterday. We are looking at an object whose shape, anomaly #3, is impossibly fragile and extreme, a form that should have been sandblasted into a rounded pebble by eons of erosion from interstellar dust. Yet it remains pristine. It is the paradox of a single, fragile, unburnt piece of paper, found wobbling on the wind in the very center of a forest fire's ancient, cold ashes. It is a newborn's cry, echoing from the lips of an ancient mummy. The object's apparent age, as told by its galactic passport, is in a state of total, irreconcilable war with its physical condition, as told by its shape and its motion. And finally, the seventh anomaly, the one that strikes at the very name we gave it, the very classification it received. When that faint, ancient reflected sunlight, the light that told us of its impossible shape and chaotic tumble, was finally gathered and passed through the prism of a spectrograph, we were, in effect, decoding its very soul. This instrument is our great chemical translator. It breaks light apart into its constituent colors, revealing a barcode of dark absorption lines. This barcode tells us, with unerring precision, what the object is made of. We were looking for the most foundational signature in the entire cometry playbook: the deep, unambiguous spectral dip caused by water ice. We were searching for the snow in the dirty snowball. We were looking for the complex, reddish, tar-like organic compounds, the tholins that are the dirt itself, the very stuff we see plastered across every comet in our own solar system. And the barcode that was returned was a forgery. It was a spectrum that spoke not of ice, but of rock. It whispered of dry silicates, of a sterile, dehydrated surface. Perhaps some readings even hinted of metal. The foundational, definitive, non-negotiable signature of water ice was not just weak, it was conspicuously, glaringly, and profoundly absent. We are therefore left not with a simple puzzle, but with a complete, holistic, and breathtaking portrait of an impossibility. We have a comet with no coma and no tail. A comet that is simultaneously silent, yet being pushed by a powerful invisible engine. A comet that possesses an impossibly fragile, artificial-looking shape. A comet that is tumbling as if it were violently struck just yesterday yet. It is an ancient pilgrim from a place of profound peace. A comet that arrives not in a chaotic plunge, but on a path of uncanny, almost deliberate convenience. And now, the final, damning stroke. A snowball that contains no snow. We have found a fish with no gills. We have found a bird with no feathers. We have found a celestial object that is, by its very existence, a living, breathing cascade of contradictions. It is a messenger that speaks in a language we cannot understand, a thing that declares, with its silent, impossible presence, that our definitions are utterly, and perhaps wonderfully, incomplete. Faced with this cascade of impossibilities, this symphony of contradictions, the scientific mind does not immediately leap to the extraordinary. Its first, most disciplined, and most powerful instinct is to seek refuge in the known. It is to find a single, elegant, natural explanation, however exotic, that can account for the data. Before we dare to whisper of intelligence, we must first exhaust the deep, weird, and wonderful possibilities of nature itself. And so, the first rung on our ladder of hypothesis was climbed. It was a brilliant, beautiful, and deeply clever idea. The hypothesis of the solid hydrogen iceberg. The logic was compelling. Hydrogen, after all, is the most abundant element in the entire cosmos. It is the stuff from which stars are born. We know that in the unimaginable, soul-crushing cold of the deepest interstellar void, just a few scant degrees above absolute zero, hydrogen can freeze solid. Perhaps, the theory went, 3I divided by Atlas was not a dirty snowball of water ice, but a pristine snowball of pure frozen hydrogen. This single, simple assumption solved the central paradox, the silence and the push, with breathtaking elegance. Why? Because solid hydrogen has a boiling point so low that it would not need the warmth of our sun to sublimate. It would have been actively outgassing, turning from a solid to a gas, from the faint, ambient starlight of the galaxy itself, long before it ever reached our neighborhood. And here is the genius of the theory. That outgassing, that wind, would be composed of pure molecular hydrogen, a gas that is, to our telescopes, almost perfectly invisible. It leaves no spectral signature. It does not glow. It does not reflect light. It would be the perfect, undetectable, ghostly engine providing the exact non-gravitational push, anomaly #2, that we observed, while simultaneously explaining the profound, baffling silence, anomaly #1. It was a masterful solution. It painted 3I divided by Atlas, not as a contradiction, but as the magnificent discovery of a new natural class of celestial object, a dark comet, a whisper from the cold void made of the universe's most fundamental building block. And as a companion to this idea, or perhaps as a more robust alternative, a second natural hypothesis was placed on the table, the nitrogen iceberg. This idea felt in many ways more grounded, as its origin story was something we could see, right here, in our own solar system. We simply had to look at Pluto. Far out in the twilight of our system, Pluto's thin atmosphere freezes and thaws with the seasons, painting its surface with vast, sprawling glaciers, not of water, but of frozen, solid nitrogen. Now, imagine another star system, containing its own exo-Pluto. And imagine a catastrophic ancient impact, a collision with another large body that strikes this world with unimaginable violence. This event would not just create a crater, it would shatter the planet's very crust, blasting continent-sized splinters of that solid nitrogen ice, these massive flat shards, into the interstellar dark. This single, violent but entirely natural event could, in theory, explain many of the anomalies in one elegant stroke. A shard of nitrogen ice would naturally have a flat extreme shape, anomaly #3. And, crucially, nitrogen ice is, like hydrogen, far more volatile than water ice. It would begin to sublimate, to outgas, from the faint warmth far beyond the orbit of Mars, providing the necessary non-gravitational push, anomaly #2. And this outgassing, this pure nitrogen wind, would be almost as invisible to our spectral senses as pure hydrogen, explaining the profound silence Anomaly has shown. It was another beautiful, naturalistic solution, a dark comet born not from the primordial void, but from the cataclysmic death of a distant, frozen world. And this hypothesis of the nitrogen shard, this splinter from a shattered, distant Pluto, it feels more grounded. It has an origin story we can almost recognize, rooted in the familiar violence of impacts. And yet when we hold this beautiful, crystalline theory up to the harsh, unwavering light of physics, it too begins to crack. For solid nitrogen is not a structural material. It is not diamond. It is not even rock. It is a fragile, brittle, crystalline solid, more akin to a wafer of old glass or a flake of mica than a robust galactic vessel. How, then, could an object made of such delicate stuff survive the very conditions it presents? How could it maintain that impossible, extreme, planar shape, anomaly #3, while simultaneously enduring the violent, chaotic, internal stress-inducing tumble, anomaly #4, it so clearly exhibits? The object's own motion would be a constant, self-destructive force, flexing and shattering that fragile architecture. And even if it could, somehow, hold itself together by some unknown internal cohesion, there is the simple, unavoidable erosion of time, anomaly #6. The interstellar void is not empty. It is a slow, relentless, cosmic sandblaster, a persistent, high-velocity whisper of cosmic ray particles and micrometeorite dust that, over a journey of millions, let alone billions of years, would have scoured and abraded any soft, frozen surface. A sharp, pristine, flat disk of nitrogen ice would have been rounded down, pockmarked, and eroded into just another lumpy, indistinct, celestial pebble, just like the stones on the cosmic beach. It could not arrive here in its current, extreme, fragile state. It would be like finding a perfect, intricate snowflake that has somehow survived a billion-year journey through a warm, humid storm. The nitrogen hypothesis, while closer to home, still collapses. It cannot reconcile the object's ancient, violent motion with its delicate, pristine form. And so, we find ourselves in a profound, intellectual cul-de-sac, a place of deep scientific unease. The elegant, naturalistic explanations, the ones that felt so clever and so safe, have evaporated upon inspection. The hydrogen iceberg, our ghostly engine, is a fantasy of physics. It is a structure too ephemeral to even exist, a snowflake attempting to cross a desert. The nitrogen shard, our splinter from a distant Pluto, is a paradox. It is a delicate, pristine artifact that claims to have survived a billion-year journey through a cosmic sandblaster, all while tumbling violently. Each hypothesis, while beautifully solving one or two of the anomalies, is savagely, fatally contradicted by the others. It is as if we have been given a key that perfectly unlocks the first door, only to find it melts in our hand as we approach the second. The problem, we are forced to admit, is not with any single piece of data. The problem is that the data, in its entirety, is at war with itself. The object's motion is at war with its substance. Its shape is at war with its age. Its silence is at war with its acceleration. The natural solutions have all collapsed under the sheer, collective weight of the contradictions. We are left standing in the quiet, sterile room of our own failed assumptions, and the data itself, the silent object, is pointing to a new door. A door we were not yet ready to open. A door that leads beyond nature. And so, if the engine is not within the object, if the rocket thruster is truly, demonstrably cold, logic itself forces us to pivot our perspective 180 degrees. We must stop searching for a force inside the vessel and begin searching for one outside of it. What if the push is not an exhalation, but an impact? There is, after all, another force that permeates our entire solar system, a force as constant and as vast as the sun's own light. Because in fact, it is the sun's light. We do not feel it in our daily lives. We perceive light as illumination, perhaps as warmth, but never as a physical push. Yet, in the cold, precise calculations of physics, light is not just a wave, it is also a particle. It is a relentless, directional stream of quadrillions upon quadrillions of massless particles called photons. And every single photon, as it journeys from the sun and strikes a surface, any surface imparts a tiny, infinitesimal, but very real kinetic push. It is a pressure, a constant, steady, and measurable force. It is in essence a wind, not of air but of pure momentum. Now, on any object of conventional mass, a planet, an asteroid, even a spacecraft, this pressure is so vanishingly weak that it is almost always ignored. It is the equivalent of a butterfly's breath trying to shift a mountain. It is a whisper, utterly lost in the deafening gravitational roar of the Sunday. We dismiss it, because against the colossal force of gravity, it is, for all intents and purposes, zero. But what if the object being struck is not a mountain? What if the mass, part of that equation, the very anchor that gravity seizes, is itself made to be almost zero? This is the fulcrum upon which the entire hypothesis pivots. You cannot make the butterfly's breath any stronger, but you can theoretically change the nature of the object it is striking. Imagine, instead of a solid, three-dimensional mountain of rock and ice, that object is a single, vast, impossibly thin sheet of material. A structure perhaps a kilometer wide, but as thin as the very foil in your kitchen, or thinner still. Suddenly the entire, fundamental dynamic of the cosmos inverts. That colossal gravitational roar of the sun, now pulling on a mass that is barely there, is itself reduced to a whisper. And that gentle, persistent, butterfly breath of light, the photon pressure, now pushing against a colossal surface area, is amplified. It is no longer negligible. It becomes the dominant force. It becomes a steady, reliable, and directional wind. An object built this way would, by the very laws of physics, be accelerated by starlight. This is the core, known, and tested principle of the solar sail. And this is the extraordinary, vertigo-inducing hypothesis put forth by physicists like Avi Loeb of Harvard University. It is the hypothesis that forces us to take the final, trembling step up the ladder, from the merely exotic to the truly extraordinary. It is the idea that what we are observing is not a natural phenomenon at all, but a technology, an artifact, a vast, lightweight, engineered structure, a lightsail, designed and built by an intelligence for the explicit purpose of traversing the great, dark ocean between the stars, using the light of those very stars as its engine. This single, radical, and profound idea does not just address the anomalies, it resolves the central warring paradoxes with a terrifying, crystal-clear elegance. The push, anomaly #2, it is the direct, measurable, calculated pressure of our own sun's light, pushing on the sail's enormous surface. The silence, anomaly #on, it is absolute, as it must be, because the engine is not a chaotic, messy, internal volcano of sublimating ice. The engine is external. The engine is the sun itself. And the shape, anomaly #3, it must be an extreme flat planar geometry. It must have an extreme area to mass ratio, because that, precisely, is what a sail is, a thing engineered to be all surface and almost no substance. The contradictions do not just vanish, they become design features. Now, we must pause. Right here, at this dizzying, precarious, and utterly thrilling precipice, this final, highest rung on our ladder of hypothesis, we must take a collective, intellectual, and philosophical breath. This is not a declaration. It is not a conclusion. It is perhaps the most important, the most delicate, and the most defining moment in the entire winding process of scientific inquiry. It is that rare, terrifying, and beautiful instant when, having charted and exhausted every path, every river, and every coastline on our known map of reality, we find ourselves standing at the shore of a vast, dark, and unknown ocean. And we are forced, by the integrity of our own exploration, to write in those blank, empty margins the four most potent words in human history. Here be dragons. The idea that we are looking at an artifact, a piece of technology, a sail crafted by an intelligence other than our own, is not in itself an answer. It is perhaps the most profound and unsettling question one could possibly ask. It must be treated as a hypothesis of absolute last resort. It is the explanation we are only permitted to consider with the most sober, rigorous, and skeptical caution after and only after every single conceivable naturalistic avenue has been explored and has been found, by our current understanding, to be impassably blocked. And as we have methodically, dispassionately seen, the blockages are formidable. The hydrogen iceberg, our ghostly engine, is a beautiful theory that simply cannot survive the faintest starlight. It is a ghost of physics. The nitrogen shard, our splinter from a distant Pluto, is a profound temporal paradox, a fragile, pristine snowflake that claims to have survived a billion-year journey through a cosmic sandblaster, all while tumbling itself apart. The natural explanations as they currently stand are failing us. They are buckling, one by one, under the sheer, combined, and contradictory weight of the 7 anomalies we have laid before us. But this failure, and this is the absolute, critical point of intellectual honesty, this failure of the known does not in and of itself constitute proof of the unknown. The great astronomer and philosopher of our modern cosmic age, Carl Sagan, provided us with the foundational, immutable axiom for such a moment. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we must be ruthlessly, almost painfully, honest with ourselves. The claim we are now, with trembling hands, placing on the scales of evidence the idea of a technology from another star is arguably the most extraordinary, the most transformative, and the most reality-shattering claim in the entire history of human thought. The evidence we currently possess, on the other hand, is indirect. It is, as of this moment, incomplete. What we have is a set of profound negatives: a lack of gas, a lack of ice, a lack of a natural shape, a lack of a natural age. We have an engine that is demonstrably not firing, and we have, in our other hand, a set of strange, spectral positives: an impossible chaotic tumble, an unnervingly convenient orbit, and a tiny, persistent, anomalous acceleration. The hypothesis of a lightsail is, for now, simply the best fit for this strange, ghostly, and contradictory collection of data. It is a key, a single, elegant shape that seems almost magically to turn in all 7 of those rusty, warring locks at once. But this, in itself, is not extraordinary evidence. It is merely an extraordinary fit. The burden of proof, therefore, does not and must not rest on the skeptic who says, with all fairness, the universe is infinitely stranger than we know. It must be some new, exotic, natural phenomenon we have not yet discovered. And they are, of course, absolutely correct. This is the most likely outcome. We have, after all, only been practicing this rigorous systematic art we call science for a few hundred years, on one microscopic blue dot, in an ocean of perhaps 2 trillion galaxies. The idea that we have already seen, catalogued, and understood every possible exotic object that the cosmos can sculpt in its endless 13.8 billion-year-old workshop is an act of profound, almost childlike arrogance. No, the burden of proof, that immense, heavy, intellectual weight, rests squarely and justly on the shoulder of the hypothesis that dares to invoke intelligence. Because in all of our recorded history, in all of our scanning of the skies, we have, as of this day, only just one single confirmed data point for the existence of technology building life: ourselves, here on Earth. To propose a second one, based on these distant, faint, and ghostly measurements, is a leap of cosmic, philosophical, and emotional proportions. To maintain objectivity is to acknowledge this. It is not a failure of imagination to default to the natural. It is the very essence of scientific discipline. It is the guardrail, the one true intellectual bulwark that separates rigorous skeptical inquiry from the intoxicating, alluring, and deeply human pull of wishful thinking. So why? Why then do we even give voice to this radical idea? Why do we stand here, on this shaking highest rung of the ladder, and not immediately climb back down to the firm, safe ground of, we simply do not know? Because the other side of that scientific discipline, the other, equally important face of the coin of objectivity, is a second, driving mandate. We must follow the data wherever it leads. We are not permitted, in the pursuit of truth, to discard a hypothesis simply because it makes us uncomfortable. We are not allowed to reject a possibility just because it sounds too much like fiction, or because it frightens us, or because it excites us. Our personal, emotional, and philosophical preferences for what we want the universe to be, or what we expect it to be, have absolutely no place in the equation. And the data, as it currently stands, the 7 stubborn, interconnected, and contradictory anomalies, is pointing. It is pointing decisively away from the comet file. It is pointing away from the asteroid file. It is pointing, with a quiet, persistent, and deeply unsettling finger, toward a solution space, a set of physical properties that just so happens to include the precise architecture of a thin, planar, lightweight, artificial object. The hypothesis of a lightsail is not born from a desire for it to be true. It is born, reluctantly and painfully, from the repeated, systematic failure of every other, more comfortable, more natural hypothesis to account for the facts. This is the critical distinction. We are not, as critics might fairly worry, leaping to aliens. We are instead being methodically, skeptically, and with great intellectual discomfort, pushed by the evidence toward an architecture that just happens to mimic an artificial design. And true objectivity demands that we do not flinch from that discomfort. It demands that we look at it squarely, that we name it, and that we begin immediately to try and break it. And that, right there, is the true, profound beauty of this moment. This is not a dead end. It is not an empty declaration of belief. It is, in fact, the very beginning of a new, targeted, and profound investigation. This hypothesis, unlike a vague, hand-waving appeal to an unknown natural phenomenon, is beautifully, wonderfully falsifiable. It makes specific, testable, and immediate predictions. If 3I divided by Atlas is a lightsail, it must be incredibly thin, with a mass-to-area ratio unlike any known natural object. It must have a certain structural density, a certain material composition that is both impossibly strong and impossibly light. As it tumbles, it must reflect light in a very specific, polarized way, just as a thin, taut, perhaps metallic-like film would, not as a porous, dusty, icy rock. The radio signals we are, at this very moment, bouncing off it, must return a signature, an echo, that suggests not a rough, permeable, uneven surface, but a smooth, flat, structurally coherent one. And most crucially, as it swings around our sun this very month, its anomalous acceleration must increase and then decrease in a way that is perfectly, precisely, and mathematically proportional to the inverse square of its distance from the sun, an exact match for the steady, continuous push from photon pressure. It cannot and must not show the chaotic, sudden, unpredictable bursts of acceleration that would be the definitive signature of a natural comet's icy jets, finally, belatedly, bursting to life. These are not philosophical musings. These are hard, physical, testable questions. These are data points we are, right now, as it makes its closest, most perilous pass, frantically, desperately, gathering. This hypothesis is not an end. It is a tool. It is a brilliant, powerful, new searchlight. It has, for the first time, given us a set of precise, new, and urgent questions to ask of this silent, baffling messenger. And that is the true hidden purpose of any great hypothesis. It is not in its inception to be right. It is in its formulation to be useful. It is to be a key that drives the next wave of focused, critical, and revolutionary discovery. And so, as we stand here, balanced on this knife edge of ambiguity, we must hold both possibilities in our minds with equal, unbiased, and profound reverence. We must become the perfect, objective fulcrum. On one side of the scale, we must place the comforting, deeply humbling idea of a new natural wonder, an exotic nitrogen shard, a primordial hydrogen iceberg, or some other bizarre form of interstellar dark comet that the universe, in its infinite creativity, has finally, wondrously revealed to us, a discovery that will, in itself, force us to rewrite our textbooks on geology and physics. This is, and must remain for now, the most statistically probable, the null hypothesis. But on the other side of that same scale, we must, with equal scientific rigor, place the other, more vertigo-inducing, more paradigm-shattering possibility, the one that the data, in its current, strange and insistent configuration, seems to fit so much better. The idea of an artifact, a relic, a sail, a message, or perhaps just the silent, tumbling cold debris of a them. Our job, as sober explorers of reality, is not to choose which one of these realities we like more. Our job is not to give in to the intoxicating romance of one or the comfortable dogma of the other. Our job is to simply wait, to watch, to listen, to gather the next photon, the next radio echo, the next crucial piece of the puzzle, with cold, dispassionate, clinical precision. We must let the object itself, in its own silent, mysterious, and now speaking way, tell us what it is. And in this very act of unbiased listening, in this profound, patient, and deeply humble state of not knowing, we are forced to confront the larger implications of either answer. Because, in the end, the philosophical weight of both of these possibilities, the weight of a universe that creates things we cannot imagine, or the weight of a universe in which we are not the only ones who imagine, is almost too much to bear. And that is where this scientific mystery transcends itself. It ceases to be about a single, strange object, and it becomes a mirror held up to our entire species, forcing us, perhaps for the first time, to truly contemplate our real, fragile, and sudden place in this vast, silent, and now very, very mysterious cosmos. In the end, as we stand here, suspended between these two towering, world-altering possibilities, that of an exquisite, unknown miracle of nature, or that of a silent, profound, and undeniable sign from an intelligence beyond our own, we must come to a quiet realization. The ultimate answer, whether it arrives tomorrow in a burst of definitive data, or whether it eludes us forever as the object fades back into the interstellar night, may not be the most important part of this encounter. The true significance of 3I divided by Atlas, its true legacy, may lie not in the solution it provides, but in the sheer, transformative power of the question it has forced us to ask. This object, in its profound and baffling silence, is not merely a physical intruder. It is a metaphysical one. It is a message, delivered to humanity not in a language of words or mathematics, but in the far more powerful language of pure physical paradox. It is a cosmic riddle, a celestial koan, sent not to give us an answer, but to shatter the very framework of our old, comfortable questions. Its very existence is, perhaps, its most profound gift, a lesson in cosmic humility, delivered not as a lecture, but as a cold, physical fact. It is a quiet, celestial reminder that the laws of physics we have so proudly written, the grand equations we have carved into the stone of our textbooks, are not, in fact, the immutable, ironclad commandments of the cosmos. They are, in truth, merely the first few tentative chapters in an infinite, and largely unread, library. They are the collected observations of a species that has only just, in the last cosmic second, opened its eyes. We have perhaps mistaken the small, warm, illuminated circle cast by our own intellectual campfire for the totality of the great, dark, and sprawling forest of reality. 3I divided by Atlas is a shadow, cast from somewhere deep and unseen within that forest. A presence that reminds us, with a shiver, of the sheer, humbling, and magnificent scale of what we do not know. The universe, it whispers in its silent, impossible passage, is under no obligation whatsoever to conform to our expectations. It is not required to fit neatly into our models. It has no duty to make one iota of sense to our fragile, pattern-seeking primate minds. Its nature is not, first and foremost, to be comprehensible to us, but simply to be. And in this moment, its very being is a direct, physical, and undeniable challenge to the comfortable boundaries of our own. For when we stare, truly stare, into the profound abyss at this one, singular, incomprehensible traveler, what, precisely, is staring back at us? Perhaps, in its ancient, cold, and unfathomable solitude, we are, for the first time, truly seeing a reflection. We, ourselves, are a species defined by a unique and profound isolation. We are the inhabitants of a single, fragile, and achingly lonely mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam, as Carl Sagan so beautifully phrased it. We are a sudden, anomalous burst of complexity and consciousness that has awakened, as far as we can tell, in an ocean of magnificent, sterile, and silent indifference. For all our listening, for all our decades of straining our electronic ears toward the heavens, for all our hopeful, desperate shouts into the radio dark, the great silence has been our only, unwavering, and constant reply. And now, this object, 3I divided by Atlas, arrives. It is a tangible piece of that very out there we have been questioning. It is a messenger, finally, from the interstellar void. And its message, delivered in its refusal to speak, in its sterile, cold, and silent passage, appears to be more silence. It is, perhaps, the physical, literal embodiment of the very silence we have always feared. It acts as a cold, cosmic mirror, one that reflects not our image, but our context. It forces us to turn our gaze away from its alien trajectory and back toward our own small, warm, teeming, precious world, and to feel, perhaps for the first time, the full, terrifying, and magnificent weight of our own cosmic solitude. In the face of this tangible visitor, the great Fermi paradox, the question of where is everybody, ceases to be a playful, abstract, philosophical game. It becomes an immediate, visceral, and profoundly personal reckoning. But in that same reflection, in that mirror of our profound isolation, we do not just see our smallness. We see, perhaps, the very reason for our significance. For this silent visitor, this challenge from the dark, also reflects the one true and most noble-making quality of our species, our insatiable, unyielding, and divine curiosity. We are, after all, the part of the universe that has awakened. We are the consciousness that does not just experience the cosmos, but questions it. We are the species that, when confronted with a silent, impossible object, does not just see a strange light in the sky and go back to sleep. We see a mystery. We feel an almost physical, intellectual hunger. We are driven with a passion that defines our entire history to build the tools, to formulate the theories, to chase the shadow, and to understand. This object, in its very impossibility, is not an insult to our intelligence. It is the most profound compliment to it. It is a locked box delivered to our doorstep that honors us by assuming we are, at our core, a species of codebreakers. The true reflection, then, is not just of our lonely place in the cosmos. It is a reflection of our restless, indomitable, and magnificent spirit, the spirit that forever compels us to look up at the night sky, to face the vast, silent, and overwhelming unknown, and to whisper, with one unified, unshakable voice, "Tell me more." It is leaving. That silent, impossible messenger, having brushed past our fire, is already falling away, beginning its long, irreversible journey back into the great interstellar dark from which it came. It is returning to the void, taking its ultimate, unverified secret with it, and it leaves us here, standing on our small blue shore with so many more questions than answers. But perhaps, in the end, that is the true, unspoken purpose of any such profound encounter. Perhaps the universe does not send us these profound riddles to be solved in the way one solves a simple puzzle. Perhaps it sends them to change us, to permanently stretch the boundaries of our imagination, to force us to build new models of reality, to forever alter the way we see ourselves. And, as it vanishes, as that final, faint, anomalous point of light is at last reclaimed by the infinite, it leaves us alone, here, under the familiar stars, to contemplate one final, lingering, and transformative question. What if the universe's most important messages, the answers to our very deepest, most existential questions, are not destined to arrive in a brilliant, obvious flash of light or a great cosmic shout? What if, instead, they are delivered with infinite ancient patience in the form of a perfect, a challenging, and an utterly profound silence?